So let's take a look at how I approached mixing the kick drum for this particular song. There's three elements to the mix chain here. I've got an EQ, compressor, and then some additional saturation. Let's start by looking at the EQ. But what I want to do first is actually show you the raw sound of the kick drum as it was printed out of Modern and Massive. So here's how it sounds, just straight from the program. After I apply the EQ moves, which I went for, this is what it sounds like. So as you can see, just looking visually at this EQ graph here, I've gone for entirely what's called subtractive EQ. Now, there's no right or wrong ways to do things, but just some people gravitate more towards enhancing the characters that they like in what they hear, and other people gravitate towards reducing the sounds that they dislike. I mean, there's no hard and fast rule. People kind of change which way they do it all the time, and within a mix you might think of different instruments in different ways, and you might use a combination of boosting or cutting on any one instrument too. But for this particular mix, I thought actually let's do it as much as possible with subtractive EQ, because that's the way I've been going with my own mixes recently, and I've been really pleased with the results. So the main points which I'm looking at is the kick drum has quite a lot of extra low end when you hear it in its raw form. Now, like I say, you could boost in loads of extra top end to compensate for that, but I think it's a bit more effective actually to cut low end. So here I'm cutting like nearly 8 dB at about 110 Hertz. Then I'm cutting some of the kind of boxy mid-range around 300 Hertz, which is going to focus the low end into a kind of smaller space and give us a more just focused and tight, but still big low end. And then cutting a little bit at the kind of 1.5K mark that's going to give you a bit more clack. Now, on smaller kick drums, it can actually be really nice to enhance this frequency area, but the particular kick drum that we recorded here is a beautiful 24-inch bass drum made out of steel, and it's got loads of those frequencies in it to begin with, so actually, if anything, it can have a bit of that tamed. And then finally, I'm cutting a little bit of the clickier parts of the sound with a 7K cut, and also a low-pass filter at 13K. Now, this is partly genre-specific. If I was working in metal, I'd probably leave more of those frequencies in. However, for something that's a bit more rock and with slower kick drum patterns, I'm allowing there to be not quite as much top-end air as I might otherwise keep in a kick drum sound for heavier styles. Apart from that, I'm also high-passing the bass drum at a very low 21 Hertz, which is probably doing next to nothing, actually. So let's just take a listen once more to before and after. I'll pop it off and then back on again. So you can see, if anything, it gets really scooped. You can hear the mid-range drop away, but this is going to really suit us very well in the mix. Moving on from the EQ, I'm going to move on to compression. And what I've got here is I'm understandably using the kick mode in Smash and Grab. I'm using it in grab mode, because what I want to try and do here is get a slightly exaggerated attack that's going to give this kick drum a lot more impact. I'm using a tiny bit of the beef to add a tiny bit of extra low end to the kick drum, having just cut some. But something that's really important is I'm not using this on full mix. So if you compress a bass drum in grab mode like this, or with any slow attack, fast release compression, you're going to find that you actually reduce the amount of low end resonance of the drum. Maybe the impact of the drum is still going to have loads of low end, but that low end isn't going to hang around for very long. It's going to be a very short burst of bass frequencies. And that perhaps isn't going to give you the nice bloom of low end that you want under your bass drum. This is where the mix knob can come in handy, because essentially by blending in some of the dry signal, you get back some of that low end bloom. And if you judge it just right, you end up with kind of a nice balance of the squishy enhanced attack of the kick drum through the compression, mixed with the original kind of bloom that you're getting from the non-compressed bass drums. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play you the raw bass drum, then engage the compressor with the mix set at 100%, which, as I mentioned, is going to cut a little bit of low end at the same time as exaggerating the attack. Then I'll roll back the mix knob to the kind of area where I think it sounds good and gives you back a bit of the low end that you might want. So hopefully you can hear what I'm hearing, which is that we're getting a little bit of more exaggerated attack on the bass drum. It's that kind of nice squishy character. I don't know how better to describe it than that for me I really like. I guess wet would be another word for it. But at the same time, yeah, still getting the bass frequencies ringing on nicely, which is going to give us a nice big sound under the mix. Finally, I'm using a little bit of tape saturation, courtesy of Slate Digital's tape. This time I'm set to the 15 IPS mode and the half-track tape, and this gives you a natural low-end bump, and I find that the 15 IPS, in comparison with the 30 IPS speed, also gives you a bit of a kind of upper mid-range emphasis and cuts a little bit of top end, and then for me it just gives you a slightly more angry sound, which I really like. This is a plugin that I use basically on every mix on my kick drum. So first I'll start with the bypass. I'm actually pushing it a little bit, and you'll hear on the harder hits you just get that little kind of saturation coming through. I wouldn't do this on a metal mix or a mix that I wanted to sound quite clean, but again, for this kind of rock vibe, I think it's just about perfect. So what I'll do now is I'll show you how the bass drum sounds with no processing, and then I'll whack the processing on and you can hear the before and after. So you can hear it's a lot more appropriate. You can hear more of the beta attack, and the low end is just nowhere near as overbearing. It's not setting off that master bus compression in the kind of way that's going to lead to too much pumping in the mix, as it was sounding before I applied the plugins.